You didn't think it would end with a joke, did you? Because when Graham Norton dropped that one-liner, just a cheeky dig during a casual monologue, the audience laughed. But Harry? He didn't. He reportedly stormed out of the green room. The smile vanished. The PR team went into overdrive, and just like that, a joke became a headline. But this wasn't just another late-night burn. This was a cultural mic drop. For years, Prince Harry was the rebellious but beloved royal, the soldier prince. The fun one, the guy with grit, heart, and a smile that could disarm a room. But somehow that man, the man who started the Invictus Games, who walked behind his mother's casket with stoic resolve, has become a cautionary tale. If you stood still watching, you clearly have thoughts. Drop sitpame below and hit subscribe for more no BS breakdowns. Let's break it down, because the meltdown wasn't just about the joke. It was about everything behind the joke. Public support? Vanishing. Royal backing? Gone. Even the Invictus Games, his proudest achievement, is now hanging by a thread. See, when Harry founded the Invictus Games back in 2014, it wasn't just another royal photo op. It mattered. It was built from something raw and real: his experience in the military, his bond with fellow soldiers, his understanding of invisible wounds. Veterans believed in him. Donors rallied. The media praised it. Fast forward to now, veterans are confused. Sponsors are hesitant, and the man who once stood as a champion for resilience, he's barely showing up. Literally, Harry skipped critical planning sessions, missed early meetings, quietly withdrew, and the whispers started. Is he still committed? Is this still his cause, or just another brand he's letting fall apart? It didn't help that his own team started spinning stories about a soft relaunch and shifting priorities. But to veterans who built their healing around this event, that doesn't cut it. The word abandonment has come up more than once. And now Harry's reportedly floating the idea of inviting the royal family to the 2027 Games, maybe as a show of unity, maybe as an olive branch, or maybe, let's be honest, as a desperate move to restore relevance. But will they come? King Charles isn't exactly sending warm signals. Palace insiders say there's been no outreach, no talks, and certainly no endorsement. William, he's got bigger things on his plate. State functions, royal tours, rebuilding trust after months of chaos. And he's doing it. His approval ratings are solid. He's stepping into the role Harry once rejected. Harry, on the other hand, is fighting ghosts. Ghosts of a legacy he helped build, but is now watching crumble. Let's not forget Meghan. Her strategic silence has spoken volumes. No public support, no statements, no Instagram quotes about resilience. Just a quiet distancing as she focuses on American ventures and lifestyle branding, because aligning with UK drama, not good for the Montecito image. Their public narrative, once built on unity and mutual advocacy, now feels like two parallel tracks. She's protecting the brand. He's caught in the backlash. And then came the Graham Norton moment. Just a joke, yes, but also a turning point. Because when comedians stop flattering and start roasting, that's when the tide truly turns. Ask any fallen star. Harry's reaction? Storming out wasn't a power move. It was a PR disaster. It confirmed what critics have said for months, that he's become thin-skinned, disconnected, and allergic to self-awareness. And when you can't laugh at yourself, even a little, it becomes a lot harder for the public to root for you, especially when the stakes are real. The Invictus Games don't need a figurehead. They need a leader, someone who shows up, makes calls, listens to veterans, signs checks, and gets their hands dirty. And lately, that hasn't been Harry. Instead, his legacy is becoming a mess of streaming deals, ghost-written memoirs, family drama, and missed opportunities, and all of it is diluting the power of what he once represented. The heartbreaking part? It didn't have to be this way. Harry had goodwill, a lot of it. He could have been the bridge between tradition and reform, the prince who humanized the monarchy without burning it down. But somewhere along the way, the mission blurred. The brand overtook the cause, and now he's facing the fallout. So where does this go? If the Invictus Games lose support and insiders say it's closer than we think, that's more than a headline. That's real people, real progress, real healing, lost. That's a generation of wounded veterans who lose a platform built just for them. And Harry? He'll lose the one institution he created from scratch. The one thing no royal PR machine handed him. That's legacy defining. Meanwhile, the palace isn't stepping in to save him. This isn't 2015. They're done shielding him from the public consequences of his decisions. They're focused on the future, on William, on duty, on optics that work. And that's the part that stings. Because Harry's pain was real, his trauma was real, his desire to carve a different path was valid. But execution matters. And at this stage, the execution has been messy, reactive, and riddled with contradictions. One day he's fighting for privacy. The next he's publishing text messages. 1 minute he's calling out the press. The next he's starring in Netflix docuseries. It's hard to follow the logic and even harder to believe the narrative. That's why the public is pulling back. Not because they're cruel, but because they're confused, exhausted, and frankly, disappointed. People loved the old Harry. They wanted to believe in the new one, but the new one hasn't shown up with clarity or consistency. He's shown up with lawsuits, and memoir chapters, and now walkouts. If there's going to be a turning point, it has to happen soon. The 2027 Invictus Games could be a reset, but only if Harry gets serious, really serious about leadership. That means no more passive attendance, no more symbolic statements. It means accountability, ownership, humility. It means showing the veterans that he's still one of them, not just a name on the masthead. Because here's the truth. The public wants to forgive. They're hungry for redemption arcs, but you have to earn them. You have to fight for them, not with press releases, but with presence. Until then, every joke, every poll, every awkward silence, it all piles up. And even the strongest legacy can buckle under that kind of weight. So where do you stand? Are you still rooting for Harry? Or have you moved on? But here's the thing. For all the headlines, the hashtags, the late-night jokes and explosive interviews, somewhere underneath it all, Harry is still human. That's part of what made people love him to begin with. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't polished. He wasn't the heir. He was the spare. But he made that title feel like a choice, not a consolation prize. Now, though, that same underdog story feels lost, replaced with confusion, contradictions, and a crumbling brand. And you can't help but wonder, does Harry know? Does he see how far he's drifted from the prince who once stood for resilience? Let's talk about the silence, the one that surrounds him now, not the silence of privacy or retreat, but the silence of distance. The kind that happens when even the people who used to defend you stop. No palace statements, no friendly quotes from anonymous senior aides, no protective buffers in the press. Not even a soft gesture from William, just radio silence, cold, strategic, unflinching. And you feel it. You feel that shift, that sense that maybe, just maybe, the door has quietly closed. Because in royal life, distance isn't just personal, it's political. When you're cut off from the inner circle, it's not always announced, it's implied. The subtle exclusions, the rearranged seating charts, the invitations that never arrive. And Harry, more than anyone, would recognize that. That's probably why he's holding on to Invictus. Because in a world where every bridge seems to be burning, that one still stands barely. But here's the harsh reality. Even Invictus has its limits. Donors aren't infinite. Trust isn't eternal. And when the founder starts missing meetings or becomes a source of controversy instead of inspiration, people notice. You can't run a charity like a brand. You can't inspire war veterans through curated Instagram posts or intermittent appearances. You have to show up. You have to fight for it the same way those veterans fought for their recovery, for their dignity. And right now, Harry sits barely holding on. Of course, the tabloids spin their own version. They call him weak, whiny, spoiled, but that's not the full story either. Because underneath the surface, there's something sad about all of this. You can sense that Harry wanted to do good, that he thought he could change things, modernize them, shake them up. But the truth is, he didn't have a long game. He had fire, but no strategy, emotion, but no infrastructure. And now the weight of his decisions is closing in. The emotional cost, the reputational toll, the slow unraveling of the things he once stood for. Even his memoir, Spare, which landed like a bombshell, feels like a ghost now. It trended for weeks. It sold in droves. But what did it leave behind? A story told, a brother shamed, a legacy fractured. That's not healing. That's exposure. And exposure without evolution only gets you so far. You think back to the Graham Norton moment, not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. The joke stung not because it was false, but because it reflected what so many people were already thinking. Harry has become the punchline to his own story. And that's the hardest fall of all. Because it means the empathy is gone. And when the public stops empathizing, the redemptive arc gets harder to write. So what sets left? A man drifting between worlds. Not royal, not fully Hollywood, too famous for anonymity, too controversial for comfort. He's caught in a space where every step is watched, but few are celebrated. And yet, there's still a way back. There always is. But it would take more than a rebrand, more than a strategic photo op, or a surprise royal invitation. It would take real humility. The kind that's rare in both palace walls and Hollywood Hills. It would mean facing the public, not with a lawsuit or a documentary, but with accountability. Admitting the missteps. Rebuilding trust. Committing to something bigger than personal pain or personal brand. It would mean anchoring to causes like Invictus, not for PR, but for purpose. Showing up without fanfare. Listening without speaking first. Giving veterans their spotlight back, not borrowing it for validation. And maybe extending a private hand to the family he once left behind. Not for cameras, not for closure, but for the sake of history and healing. Because the monarchy isn't just a brand. It's a narrative machine. And right now that machine is moving forward with or without him. William, for all his reserve, is playing the long game. Steady, measured, focused on duty. He doesn't need the public to love him every day. He just needs them to respect him enough to follow. Harry, though, he once had the love. But love without trust evaporates. That's the final irony here. The Spare once had all the freedom. No crown, no throne, no expectation. Just opportunity. A chance to reinvent what it meant to be royal, to be human, to be himself. And now, that same freedom has become a trap, because when you burn the rulebook, you have to write your own. And that takes vision, not vengeance. So where does that leave us? Watching, waiting, maybe hoping. Because as chaotic and frustrating as Harry's journey has been, you still want it to mean something. You want the Invictus Games to thrive. You want the pain to lead to purpose. You want the past to become something more than a media feud. But the clock is ticking. The public's patience is thin, and redemption stories don't write themselves. It's up to him now. And if he doesn't step up, really step up, the story that ends up defining him won't be about bravery or love or healing. It'll be about waste. About a man who had every chance to turn pain into purpose, but chose pride instead. And now you're watching something you never thought you'd see, a prince on the edge of irrelevance. Not because he's faded from the spotlight, but because the spotlight no longer flatters him. It exposes. It amplifies. It repeats the same question over and over. What happened to Prince Harry? The man who walked behind his mother's coffin with a bowed head and steel in his spine. The soldier who refused to take special treatment in combat. The royal who made you feel like royalty didn't have to mean detachment. He was raw, relatable, and real. But now, those qualities feel blurred, confused, repackaged for the algorithm. Somewhere along the line, authenticity became aesthetic. The vulnerability once powerful now feels performed. The message once clear is clouded in branded content, ghost-written memoirs, and Netflix editing rooms. And that right there is the tension that keeps building. Because you wanted Harry to win. Not over anyone else, but for himself. For what he represented. For what his break from the firm could have meant. Instead, it's turned into the most expensive identity crisis in modern royal history. Sure, he has the mansion, the chickens, the podcasts that almost were, but when you strip it all down, the core question remains, what is Prince Harry for now? That might sound brutal, but it's the reality of public life. You don't get to exist in the vacuum of nostalgia. Not when you're playing the fame game on both sides of the Atlantic. Not when every tabloid, TikTok, and late-night monologue has turned you into a talking point. So no, this isn't just about Invictus. Or one joke on Graham Norton. This is about a slow-motion fall from narrative grace. The kind of fall that's harder to come back from than scandal, because scandals can be temporary, but irrelevance. That's cultural exile. And maybe that's why Meghan has gone quiet. Maybe she sees it too. That the plan to rebrand as a new kind of power couple didn't land the way it was supposed to. That the inspirational tone of their interviews began to sound more like rehearsed self-mythology than vulnerability. And let's be real, America loves a comeback story. But even here, even now, the enthusiasm is cooling. It's hard to sell empowerment when the product feels out of touch. When the luxury aesthetic overshadows the causes, when the message gets lost in the merch. So you're left with a man who has built his new life on the ruins of his old one, and the foundation is starting to crack. Because the Invictus Games mattered, not just to him, but to the world. They were proof that Harry could take pain and channel it into purpose. That he could be more than a tabloid headline or a ceremonial royal. And now those games hang in the balance. Sources whisper that sponsors are pulling back, that organizers are unsure, that the very people Invictus was built to honor, the veterans, the injured, the overlooked, feel abandoned. And that sips the deepest cut of all. Because Invictus isn't just a brand, it's a promise. A promise that no one would be forgotten, that scars could become symbols of strength, that service mattered beyond uniforms and medals. For Harry to step away, even if unintentional, isn't just poor optics, it's a betrayal of that promise. And yet, despite all the noise, there's still a path forward. But it won't come through stylized documentaries or another tell-all. It won't come from palace leaks or silence or curated Instagram updates. It will come from presence. Harry has to show up, not for a camera, not for a paycheck, but for the people, for the purpose, for the very thing that once gave his life meaning beyond bloodlines. He has to go back to Invictus, not as a figurehead, but as a founder. He has to earn back the trust that's been shaken, not through statements, but through action. And he has to do it without the safety net of royal PR. Because the truth is, he burned that bridge a long time ago. And while the monarchy might not be vindictive, it's certainly not sentimental. The palace is an institution, and institutions protect themselves. So if Harry thought they'd step in again to rescue the image, to provide cover, to spin the narrative, he was wrong. They've moved on. William has filled the void. Charles is consolidating. And Harry? He's off the grid. Or at least that sips how it feels. Even his allies seem unsure now. Celebrities who once championed him have gone quiet. Interviews have dried up. Collaborations stalled. There's a sense that being Team Sussex just isn't as fashionable as it once was. And that's the cost of overexposure without evolution. Because in the court of public opinion, you only get so many plot twists before the audience tunes out. So where does Harry go from here? If he wants to reclaim the narrative, he'll have to abandon the narrative playbook. He'll have to ditch the media strategy and embrace the reality, the mess, the uncomfortable parts. That means acknowledging missteps. That means speaking up, not with rehearsed talking points, but with accountability. That means rebuilding relationships, not for headlines, but for healing. Maybe even with his own family. Yes, the rift with William runs deep. Yes, the palace machinery is cold. But reconciliation doesn't need a parade. Sometimes it starts with a phone call. Not for public consumption. Not for optics, just for them. Because legacies aren't built on exile. They're built on what you do with the time you have and who you choose to stand beside. And right now, Harry is standing alone. That doesn't have to be the ending, but it could be if something doesn't change. If he continues down this path of curated distance and branded vulnerability, his story may end not in tragedy, but in forgettable irrelevance. And that might be the cruelest fate of all for a man who once held the world's empathy in his hands. So maybe it's time to put the cameras down, to put the brand on pause, to stop trying to win the narrative and start living the truth. Because the story isn't set over, but it sits slipping away. And if Harry doesn't act soon, someone else will write the ending for him. You can't help but wonder, how did it come to this? A man once so clearly defined by purpose now appears unmoored, detached. Not from the world, but from himself. From the values that once made him relatable, grounded, even admirable. There was a time when Prince Harry meant more than royal lineage. It meant impact, visibility for the invisible, advocacy without vanity, and most of all, it meant showing up. That's why Invictus mattered. Because Harry wasn't lending his name to a charity from a distance. He was the charity. He was on the ground, shaking hands, sitting with veterans, hearing their stories, not just filming them. The empathy was real, the investment was personal, and the outcome, life-changing. But now, the same people who once wore Invictus medals like armor are whispering disappointment. They're asking where he is, not in the tabloids, not in Netflix cuts, but on the front lines of the movement he started. And for the first time, those whispers are louder than the applause. It's not because he left the royal family. It's not because he moved to California. It's because he left something behind in the process, something harder to reclaim than a title: trust. And trust, once fractured, doesn't come back just because you want it to. It comes back when you do. Which is why his absence from the Invictus Games isn't just a scheduling conflict. It's symbolic. It confirms the quiet fear that maybe he's changed, that maybe the mission no longer fits the lifestyle. You can try to PR your way out of that. You can call it stepping back, restructuring, new leadership, or any other palatable phrase cooked up in a crisis meeting. But the truth doesn't care about spin. The veterans know. The fans know. The world knows. Harry's not showing up, and that absence is louder than any statement he could possibly make. Even worse, it's getting noticed by people who never used to criticize him. Veteran advocates, organizers, donors, allies, the people who gave him the benefit of the doubt again and again. Now they're starting to say it out loud. If Harry won't commit to Invictus, what will he commit to? That's not just shade, that's existential. Because once you're seen as someone who abandons what they build, people stop building with you. They stop investing in your causes, your projects, your promises. And then what are you left with? Branding, optics, talk shows, a memoir that already told your side of the story, and a dwindling number of people still listening. Which brings us to the other elephant in the room. His family. He's extended an olive branch, or so we're told. Invitations to the next Invictus Games, a hope that 2027 will be a reunion of sorts, a public gesture that maybe, just maybe, things can be repaired. But let's not pretend this is a clean path forward. The royal family doesn't move on Instagram time. Their forgiveness isn't transactional. And after everything Oprah, Spare, the docuseries, the thinly veiled Barbs, why would they come running back? They've made their position clear. Harry left. That was his right. But actions have consequences. Especially when those actions include turning the inner workings of your family into globally televised drama. Especially when they come with ghost-written call-outs and carefully worded betrayals. It may have felt necessary at the time, maybe it was, but the damage, it lingers. Now the palace is focused on preservation. William is stepping up, Kate is back in the public eye when she can be, and Charles, despite his own health challenges, is reinforcing the crown's image of continuity. They're consolidating, not chasing. So even if Harry wants to open the door, he's not guaranteed anyone will walk through it. And the longer the silence stretches between him and the institution that shaped him, the harder it becomes to reverse the narrative. Because public sympathy has an expiration date, people may have supported the break, but they expected something more meaningful to come from it. Something transformative. Instead, they got a Spotify deal that flopped, a Netflix contract in limbo, and a lifestyle brand that sells artisan jam. Let that sink in. A prince who once led veterans through physical rehabilitation now sells jam in small batch jars from a $14 million mansion. It's not inherently wrong. People are allowed to evolve, to pivot, to live differently. But the symbolism of that shift, it's undeniable. It's jarring. And it raises uncomfortable questions about who Harry is now, and whether that man still aligns with the ideals he once stood for. Because right now, there's a growing gap between his image and his impact. The man who once put purpose first now feels adrift in an ocean of content, critics, and contradictions. And Meghan? Her silence is tactical. She's focused on the brand, on clean lines and curated elegance. She's not picking fights, she's not giving interviews, she's preserving her half of the Sussex identity, the one that works in Hollywood boardrooms and luxury partnerships. But Harry is different. He was never built for detachment. He's emotional, relational, reactive. And now that reaction is playing out on a world stage with fewer allies, fewer achievements, and fewer safe spaces left. Even his body language at recent appearances tells a story. Less confident, more guarded, less relaxed, more rehearsed. He's not just in a media storm, he's weathering something deeper, something personal. The kind of storm you don't fix with press releases. The kind that requires hard conversations, long apologies, and quiet work away from the cameras. The kind of storm that demands humility. Because that's what this really comes down to, isn't it? Harry's journey has always been rooted in pain. The loss of his mother, the pressure of being the spare, the invisible scars of military service, the institutional rigidity of the crown. It's a lot. But pain isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card for accountability. It's a call to rise, not to run. And if Harry still wants to be remembered as more than a rebel prince, if he wants to preserve Invictus, his relationships, his legacy, he'll have to remember what made people believe in him to begin with. Showing up. Not perfectly, not with PR polish, just present. At Invictus, with his family. In service, with purpose. That's Sips, the version of Harry people rooted for. That's the version who still has a chance to matter. Because in the end, titles fade, trends fade, even scandals fade, but impact lasts.